Hello there and welcome back to Joy Sightings. This is edition number 41. Today I again read from The Wit and Wisdom of Safed the Sage, and the three parables I'll read today are The New Recipe, The River and the Flood, and The Crossing Tender. The New Recipe. In this story also, Safed uses the word sinkers, a slang word that means donuts. There was a morning when I rose from my bed and looked at the sunrise and thanked God that I was alive, even as I do each day. And I descended and came down and ate my breakfast. And behold, upon the table there were donuts. Now if there be donuts, I eat of them, but they minish not in any wise the other things that I eat, for I eat of them last. And I said unto Keturah, Hast thou bought sinkers from the market? For I had not smelled the cooking of them. And she said, I have not, for I value my peace of mind and the goodwill of my husband. I made these, yea, and I made them by a new recipe. And I said, Wherefore wilt thou try new recipes, when already thy donuts are perfect? And she said, It is not thus that thou dost preach. For thou dost ever exhort men to do better and better. And I said, Thine aspiration to have things better and better is thine only fault. Thou dost even try to have it so with thy husband. And she said, Yes, and thus far I have done very well in the matter of his improvement. So I ate of the donuts, and I said, Behold, these are just like all of thy donuts. And she said, I'm glad that thou dost think so, for they are so made that they absorb less fat, therefore they are more wholesome. And I said, Go not too far with me in that wholesome stunt. I do not want things too wholesome. I can digest anything, save it be health foods. And she said, My lord, when I try a new recipe, thus do I try it. I consider all the things that I have been wont to use that I know are good, and if I find in the new recipe some other good things, that also do I put in. And I said, Keturah, thou hast the finest idea of progress to be found in any cook on earth. For thou goest ahead, but thou playest not far from thy base. And I said, If all reformers could learn from thee, then would the millennium come sooner. And she said, I'm glad that thou dost like the new donuts. And I verily did like them, for they had one ingredient that changeth not, and that is Keturah. For believe me, her donuts are some donuts. The River and the Flood. I have a friend who dwelleth in a city that is builded beside a great river, even the Ohio. And there are times when the bottom of the river getteth up on top, so that the boats have hard work to not puncture their tires. But there are other times when the river riseth as Jordan overflowing his banks, and then there is something doing. Now I visited my friend as the winter drew to an end, and the river began to rise. And the ice went out in great cakes that swam in the yellow water, and the backwaters were in all the valleys and over the lowlands, and the morning papers told every day that it was 2 feet higher in Pittsburgh. And I stood beside the stream, and it flowed in a wide yellow flood that no man could turn aside. And when I went away and came again, behold, it washed the bank at a higher level. And the water came into the street of the town where I was, and still it rose. And I looked that the men of the city should have shown fear, but they showed it not. And certain of them whose places of business were near the wharf spake of the water that was putting out the fires in their basement, but they stuck to their business on the ground floor. And when the water rose to the ground floor, they moved their papers upstairs and locked up and took a vacation for a few days. And day after day the water rose till they did little business in that town, save the moving of property upstairs and waiting. Now I was anxious, for it seemed as if the river would never cease rising. But there came a morning when the paper said that the river had fallen 4 inches in Pittsburgh. And behold, it still was rising where we were, and it grew higher all that day and that night, so that the friend whom I visited moved out of his house and took me to the hotel, where he had reserved rooms for us, and we lodged there. But all men spake cheerfully, for they said, Though it rise another foot tonight, and put out the fires in the hotel and the printing office and the bank, yet tomorrow it will begin to go down. And it was even as they said. For I stood next day upon the bank, and the river was miles in width, but there was a streak of mud as it were an handbreadth wide above the water on the shore, and the people began to assemble their mops and prepare to clean up. Now it was a new experience to me, but to them it was familiar. And they knew the power of the water, and they knew the raging of the flood, and they knew that they could not stop it. But they possessed their souls with patience, for they said, It cannot rise forever, and its pride and fury will soon pass. And I prayed to my God that I might accept life's inevitable trials, even as the men of that town accepted the flood. But if I go to live in that town, I want a little rainbow of mine own. The next story is the crossing tender. In those days, at railway crossings, there was a person who operated the bar that went up and down to prevent people going across when a train was coming. That person was called the crossing tender. The crossing tender. Now there is a railway that runneth through the town where I live, and there are gates that are pulled down when a train goeth by. And one day when I would have crossed the tracks, the gate went down, so that I stopped. And I spake unto the man who keepeth the crossing, and I said, Lovest thou thy job? And he said, I count myself lucky to have this job, for I am neither young nor strong. Nevertheless, mine is a hard job. And I said, Wherefore should thy job be hard? And he said, Because I save people's lives, and they turn and curse me. And I said, That's strange, for they should love thee. And he said, They come down the street, breaking the speed limit, and honking for me to lift the gates, or if they be on foot, they duck under. And when I warn them not to cross the tracks lest they die, they act as if I were their enemy. And I took him by the hand, and I said, Thou art my brother, and my job is like unto thine. And he said, "Not so you could see it. Art thou not a minister and a philosopher?" And I answered, "I am a crossing tender. Where thou seest yonder spire, I tend a crossing. And I say unto the wicked, Go not in thine evil way, lest thou die. But they continue to go as they did before. And I say unto the heedless, Duck not under the gate, lest evil befall thee. But they duck as they were wont to do. Now I had on my best clothes, and the crossing tender had on his overalls, but we clasped hands, and he knew that we were brothers. For my lot in life is even as his, and my job hath the same trials. Nevertheless, his is a good job, and so is mine. And every now and then we keep people on the right side of the gate. So I considered this, and I thanked God for my job, and I resolved to do it as well as I could.